A 12-year-old boy wakes up before dawn, grabs his red wagon, calls the family dog, and heads out to deliver newspapers on a quiet suburban street. It's a routine thousands of kids across America followed every morning. But on this particular Sunday, something goes terribly wrong. Within hours, that boy vanishes without a trace, leaving behind only an abandoned wagon full of undelivered papers and a mystery that has haunted a family, a community, and an entire nation for more than 4 decades. No body has ever been found. No arrests have ever been made. And yet the questions linger. What happened to Johnny Gosch on the morning of September 5th, 1982? Welcome to Dark Case Desk, where we examine the coldest cases, the most baffling disappearances, and the stories that refuse to stay buried. Today, we're diving deep into one of the most enduring and heartbreaking missing child cases in American history, the disappearance of John David Gosch, known to everyone as Johnny. Johnny Gosch was born on November 12, 1969, in Des Moines, Iowa. He was the only child of John and Noreen Gosch, a young couple living in the comfortable suburb of West Des Moines. By all accounts, the Gosches were a typical middle-class family. John Sr. worked as a union representative, and Noreen stayed home to raise their son. Johnny grew up in a quiet neighborhood filled with tree-lined streets, well-kept lawns, and families who knew one another. It was the kind of place where kids rode bikes until dark and parents felt safe letting them walk to school or deliver papers before sunrise. From a young age, Johnny was described as bright, polite, and responsible. He had light brown hair, piercing blue eyes, and a smile that lit up photographs. He stood about 5 feet 3 inches tall and weighed around 140 pounds at the time he disappeared. He loved sports, especially baseball, and he was known for being a hard worker. When he was old enough, he took on a paper route for the Des Moines Register, the major daily newspaper in the area. Delivering papers was a classic childhood job in those days, and Johnny took pride in it. He earned his own money, learned responsibility, and got to spend time with the family's miniature dachshund, Gretchen, who often tagged along. The route covered a familiar part of West Des Moines, mostly around the streets near the Gosch home on Marcour Lane. Johnny had been doing the route for a while, but his parents were cautious. On weekdays, his father usually accompanied him. On weekends, when the bundles were heavier, Johnny would sometimes go with other paperboys or ask his dad to come along. The drop-off point where the boys picked up their papers was at a nearby intersection, and from there, they would fan out to deliver. The day before Johnny vanished, Saturday, September 4th, 1982, was uneventful. Johnny spent time with his family, and there was no indication anything was wrong. He went to bed early because he had to be up before dawn the next morning. That Sunday was supposed to be the first time in a while that Johnny would do the route completely on his own. His parents had discussed it and decided he was ready. He was 12 years old after all, and the neighborhood was safe. At around 5:45 in the morning on September 5th, Johnny woke up quietly. He dressed in a white sweatshirt with Kim's Academy printed on the back, warm-up pants, and blue rubber sandals. He grabbed his bright red wagon to carry the papers, filled a yellow paper bag with supplies, and called Gretchen to come with him. Without waking his parents, he slipped out the door into the cool pre-dawn darkness. West Des Moines was still asleep. Streetlights glowed softly, and the only sounds were distant birds beginning to stir and the occasional car passing through. Johnny walked the familiar route to the paper drop-off point at the intersection of 42nd Street and Marcour Lane. Several other paperboys were already there or arrived around the same time. They loaded their wagons and bags, chatting quietly in the dim light. Witnesses later recalled that Johnny seemed perfectly normal that morning. He loaded his papers into the red wagon, greeted the other boys, and prepared to start his deliveries. But something unusual happened at the drop-off point that would become one of the most scrutinized moments in the entire case. One of the paperboys, a teenager named Mike, remembered a man in a blue two-tone Ford Fairmont pulling up near the group. The driver turned off the engine, opened the passenger door, and swung his legs out onto the curb. He began asking the boys for directions, specifically where 86th Street was. Mike thought it was odd because the man seemed to be focusing mostly on Johnny. Johnny turned to Mike and said quietly, "I've got my papers loaded in the wagon. I'm scared. I'm getting out of here. I'm going to head home." As Johnny started to leave, the car pulled away, but not before the driver flicked the dome light 3 times, an action some later interpreted as a possible signal. Almost immediately after that, another man, a tall figure, appeared from between 2 nearby houses and began following Johnny on foot as he headed down 42nd Street toward Marcourt Lane. 2 other paperboys saw Johnny from across the street and waved or said hello, but he kept walking. That was the last confirmed sighting of Johnny Gosch by multiple witnesses. Meanwhile, a resident named P.J. Smith was awakened around the same time by the loud slam of a car door. He looked out his window and saw a vehicle, described as silver or black, making a sharp turn and rolling through a stop sign. Another neighbor, watching from a bedroom window, saw Johnny talking to a stocky man near a blue car with out-of-state plates. Yet another witness, John Rossi, noticed the same blue car and the conversation, thinking it looked suspicious. Under hypnosis later, Rossi recalled partial license plate details suggesting the plate was from Warren County, Iowa. None of these witnesses realized at the moment that anything truly dangerous was happening. It was early. The boys were used to occasional interactions with drivers asking directions, and the neighborhood felt safe. But within the next hour, everything changed. Back at home, Noreen Gosch woke up around 7 o'clock to the ringing telephone. It was a neighbor complaining that their newspaper hadn't been delivered. More calls came in quickly from other subscribers on Johnny's route. Concerned, Noreen's husband, John Sr., got dressed and went out to look for his son. He drove the route and just 2 blocks from home found Johnny's red wagon sitting abandoned on the sidewalk. It was still full of undelivered newspapers. The yellow paper bag was there, and Gretchen, the little dachshund, was sitting nearby, alone. John rushed home and told Noreen what he had found. Panic set in immediately. They called the West Des Moines Police Department to report Johnny missing. But what happened next would frustrate the family for years and highlight how differently missing children cases were handled in the early 1980s. At that time, many police departments operated under a policy that required a 72-hour waiting period before classifying a missing juvenile as an official missing person. The assumption was often that the child had run away, especially a 12-year-old boy. Despite the abandoned wagon, the undelivered papers, and the witness accounts of strange men and vehicles, the initial police response treated Johnny's disappearance as a possible runaway situation. Noreen and John objected strongly. They knew their son. Johnny had no history of running away. He had no reason to leave. He was happy at home, doing well in school, and looking forward to the new school year. There were no signs of family conflict, no note left behind, nothing missing from his room except the clothes he was wearing. But the police policy delayed a full-scale search. It wasn't until later that morning, after the Gosches insisted and more neighbors called, that officers arrived to take a formal report. Even then, the early investigation moved slowly. Captain Bob Rushing, who was in charge at the time, later stated publicly that there appeared to be no crime scene and no witnesses who saw anything definitive. To the police, it looked like the boy had simply vanished. For Noreen and John, those words were devastating. Their only child was gone, and the authorities seemed unwilling or unable to treat it as the emergency it clearly was. They began their own search immediately, driving the streets, knocking on doors, talking to anyone who might have seen something. Other paperboys and their parents joined in. The community rallied, but the hours were ticking by, and every minute felt critical. By the end of that first day, the reality sank in. Johnny was missing, and no one knew where he was. The quiet suburban morning had turned into every parent's worst nightmare. As the sun set on September 5th, 1982, the Gosch family sat in their home surrounded by police reports, witness statements, and a growing sense of helplessness. Little did they know that this was only the beginning of a search that would span decades, change laws across the country, and spark nationwide conversations about missing children. Like this video if you want to see the full story unfold, comment your thoughts below, and hit that subscribe button with notifications on so you never miss an update from Dark Case Desk. In the weeks after Johnny Gosch vanished, the quiet streets of West Des Moines filled with searchers, flyers, and television cameras. What began as a desperate family plea turned into something much larger, a relentless push for answers that would expose deep cracks in how missing children were handled and force the entire country to confront a painful reality. Sometimes kids disappear, and the system isn't ready to find them. As the initial shock wore off, the Gosch family refused to sit still. Noreen especially threw herself into the search with a determination that surprised even those closest to her. She and John Sr. spent hours driving every street in the neighborhood, stopping strangers, showing Johnny's picture to anyone who would look. Volunteers joined them, combing fields, ditches, and wooded areas around the city. Police organized larger searches, bringing in dogs and helicopters, but every lead seemed to evaporate as quickly as it appeared. The witness accounts from that morning were revisited again and again. The blue Ford Fairmont, the man asking directions, the flickering dome light, the tall figure following Johnny on foot. All of it painted a picture of something planned, something deliberate. Yet when police tracked down similar vehicles or questioned potential suspects, nothing solid emerged. The partial license plate details from the hypnotized witness led nowhere definitive. The silver or black car that sped away after the slammed door, gone without a trace. Days turned into weeks, and the frustration grew. Noreen later recalled how police seemed to hit wall after wall. Lieutenant Jeff Miller, a young officer at the time, remembered calling in everyone: state troopers, detectives, reserves, even the Polk County Sheriff's Department. They canvassed door to door, asking neighbors if they had seen or heard anything unusual. But in the early morning darkness, most people had been asleep. Few had anything new to offer. Captain Bob Rushing's words continued to haunt the family: that there was no obvious crime scene, that Johnny seemed to have simply vanished. To Noreen, that explanation felt hollow. She knew her son hadn't run away. There was no packed bag, no angry note, no history of trouble. Johnny had been happy, looking forward to the new school year. He had money in his pocket from the route, plans with friends. Running made no sense. The slow initial response became a point of lasting bitterness. In 1982, many departments still waited 72 hours before treating a missing child as a true emergency, especially if the child was a preteen or teenager. The assumption too often leaned toward runaway rather than abduction. Noreen fought that mindset from the very beginning, insisting to anyone who would listen that Johnny had been taken. As the official investigation moved slowly, the Gosches turned to private help. Noreen contacted retired detectives, including Jim Rothstein from New York City and Ted Gunderson, former head of the FBI's Los Angeles office. Both men had experience with organized crime and missing persons cases. They began digging into leads that local police hadn't pursued as aggressively. What they told Noreen in private conversations planted seeds of a darker theory: that Johnny's disappearance wasn't random, that it might involve something organized, something that reached beyond a lone predator. By October, just 1 month after the abduction, Noreen took a bold step. She founded the Johnny Gosch Foundation, dedicated to finding her son and helping other families facing the same nightmare. She poured everything into it: time, energy, whatever money the family could spare. The foundation became her lifeline, a way to channel the grief and rage into action. She started a newsletter, organized awareness events, and began speaking wherever anyone would give her a platform. The media attention grew steadily. Local stations covered the story daily at first, then national outlets picked it up. Noreen appeared on television, radio, anywhere that would have her, holding up Johnny's picture and pleading for information. She was articulate, passionate, and unwavering. Viewers across the country saw her pain and responded. Tips poured in, hundreds, then thousands. Some were obvious hoaxes, others vague sightings, but each one had to be checked. In March of 1983, 6 months after Johnny disappeared, a woman in Oklahoma reported something chilling. She told authorities that a young boy approached her in a convenience store parking lot, screaming that he was Johnny Gosch and that he had been kidnapped. Before she could react, 2 men grabbed the boy and forced him into a vehicle. They sped away, and she never saw them again. Investigators followed the lead, but it led nowhere conclusive. Was it really Johnny, or a desperate child in a different situation? The uncertainty only deepened the mystery. Other reports trickled in over the years. A dollar bill turned over to authorities with handwriting that Noreen insisted was Johnny's. Scrawled words saying, "I am alive. Johnny Gosch." Experts examined it, but opinions differed on whether the writing truly matched. In Denver, someone found "Johnny Gosch was here," written in red nail polish on a restaurant bathroom wall. Prank or genuine cry for help? Noreen believed the latter. She clung to every scrap that suggested her son was still out there. The publicity Noreen generated began to bear fruit in unexpected ways. In 1984, she drafted legislation that would change how Iowa, and eventually other states, handled missing children reports. The Johnny Gosch bill mandated immediate police action when a child was reported missing, eliminating the old 72-hour waiting period. It passed in Iowa on July 1, 1984, and within months, 8 other states adopted similar versions. For the first time, law enforcement had to treat these cases as potential emergencies from the moment they were reported. That same year, Noreen traveled to Washington, D.C. She testified before a Senate subcommittee on organized crime, speaking bluntly about what she believed had happened to her son. Her words carried weight, raw, unfiltered, and impossible to ignore. She received threats afterward, anonymous calls warning her to back off, but she refused. Her testimony helped lay the groundwork for the creation of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. When the center opened, President Ronald Reagan personally invited Noreen to the dedication ceremony. But even as Noreen's efforts started changing laws and raising awareness, another tragedy struck close to home. On August 12, 1984, another Des Moines paperboy vanished under eerily similar circumstances. 13-year-old Eugene Martin disappeared while delivering newspapers on the city's south side. Like Johnny, he left early in the morning, his papers were found undelivered, and there were reports of suspicious vehicles in the area. Police investigated possible connections, but officially found none. The routes were different, the neighborhoods separate. Yet to Noreen, the parallels were impossible to dismiss. She later claimed a private investigator had warned her months earlier that another paperboy abduction would happen in mid-August on the south side. Whether that warning was real or coincidence, Eugene's disappearance fueled Noreen's conviction that something larger was at work. The two cases together caught the attention of a local dairy company, Anderson and Erickson. An employee connected to Eugene's family approached the company president, Jim Erickson, asking for help spreading the boys' pictures. The dairy agreed to print Johnny and Eugene's photos and descriptions on the sides of their half-gallon milk cartons. It was a simple but powerful idea. Put the missing children's faces in front of millions of families at breakfast tables across the region. The campaign worked. Soon other dairies joined in, and the concept went nationwide. Johnny and Eugene became two of the first children featured in what would become known as the Milk Carton Kids program. For a few years, parents and children across America saw their faces every morning, a constant reminder that some kids never came home. The program generated countless tips and helped recover several missing children in other cases, even if it never brought Johnny or Eugene back. The Milk Carton campaign ran strong for several years, but eventually faded. Some parents complained that the images frightened their own children, turning breakfast into a daily dose of fear. By the late 1980s, the program largely ended, replaced by newer methods like Amber Alerts that would come later. Still, Johnny's case had helped pioneer it, and the awareness it created was undeniable. Another disappearance followed in March of 1986, when 13-year-old Mark Allen vanished from Des Moines under suspicious circumstances. Again, no direct link was proven, but the pattern of young boys going missing in the same area kept the fear alive. Through all of this, Noreen never slowed down. She made nearly 1,000 public appearances, speaking to law enforcement agencies, missing persons groups, and anyone working against child exploitation. She developed programs, wrote articles, and kept Johnny's name in the headlines. The strain took its toll. The marriage to John Sr. ended in divorce in 1993, but Noreen's mission only grew stronger. By the late 1980s, the leads from private investigators began pointing towards something Noreen had suspected for years, that Johnny had been taken not by a random predator, but by people involved in organized child exploitation. The names and allegations that surfaced would become some of the most controversial chapters of the entire story. The deeper Johnny Gosch dug with the help of those private investigators, the more the picture darkened. What started as whispers about a possible organized element soon exploded into allegations that reached into powerful circles, names that most people would never expect to hear in connection with a missing paperboy from Iowa. By 1989, 7 years after Johnny vanished, Noreen found herself face to face with a young man whose story would change everything she thought she knew and divide opinions forever. His name was Paul Bonacci. He was 21 years old at the time, living in Nebraska, and he carried the weight of his own horrific past. Bonacci claimed he had been abused as a child and pulled into a world of exploitation that went far beyond anything imaginable. He told Noreen that he had been part of the same network that took her son. More than that, he said he had personally helped kidnap Johnny on that September morning in 1982. According to Bonacci, the operation was vast, sophisticated, and protected. He described being used to lure Johnny into a vehicle, then transporting him to a location where he was held and abused. Bonacci provided details that chilled Noreen to the core, specific marks on Johnny's body that had never been released to the public. Everyone knew about the birthmark on his chest that appeared in missing posters, but Bonacci mentioned a horseshoe-shaped scar on Johnny's tongue from an old burn, a burn scar on his lower leg, and even the way Johnny stammered when he got upset. These were private family details, things only someone close to Johnny could know. Noreen believed him instantly. To her, those unreleased facts were proof that Bonacci had been there, had seen her son after the abduction. She became convinced that Johnny had been taken into a child prostitution ring, one that trafficked kids across state lines for the pleasure of wealthy and influential men. Bonacci's allegations tied directly into a scandal that had already been rocking Nebraska, the Franklin Credit Union controversy. At the center was Lawrence E. King Jr., a prominent Republican activist, singer at political events, and manager of the Franklin Community Federal Credit Union in Omaha. King lived lavishly, throwing extravagant parties and rubbing shoulders with politicians at every level. But by the late 1980s, whispers turned into investigations when the credit union collapsed amid accusations of embezzlement. What emerged next was far uglier. Multiple young people came forward claiming they had been abused by King and others in positions of power. They described being flown to parties on the East Coast and beyond, forced into prostitution and worse. Some spoke of satanic rituals, extreme violence, even sacrifices, claims so outrageous that they strained belief. Bonacci was one of those alleged victims, and he placed King at the heart of the network that supposedly took Johnny. Noreen latched on to this. To her, it explained everything. The lack of arrests, the stalled investigation, the strange cars and signals on that quiet morning. She believed powerful people were shielding the truth, that Johnny had been stolen to order for this ring. She went public with Bonacci's story, arranging interviews and pushing authorities to listen. But the response was crushing. Local police in West Des Moines and the FBI dismissed Bonacci as unreliable. He had a criminal history, mental health struggles, and his accounts shifted over time. Investigators pointed out inconsistencies in his statements and noted that he had absorbed details from media coverage over the years. Separate state and federal grand juries looked into the Franklin allegations and concluded they were unfounded. A hoax built on suggestion, therapy sessions gone wrong, and desperate attention-seeking. To Noreen, that dismissal only proved the cover-up was deeper than she feared. Big names meant big protection. She fought harder, testifying about what Bonacci had told her, demanding someone take it seriously. The divide grew. Some saw her as a grieving mother grasping at any hope. Others as a warrior exposing uncomfortable truths. The case, already heartbreaking, now carried layers of conspiracy that made it impossible to discuss without strong opinions on every side. Years rolled on with no breakthrough. Tips still came in, but most fizzled out. Noreen kept traveling, speaking, keeping Johnny's face in the public eye. Age progressed, images circulated, showing what he might look like in his teens, then 20s. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children updated posters regularly, but the trail stayed ice cold. Then in March of 1997, something happened that Noreen would carry with her for the rest of her life. An encounter so surreal that she kept it private at first, only revealing it publicly 2 years later during testimony in a Nebraska court. It was around 2:30 in the morning when a knock startled her awake in her apartment. She looked through the peephole and saw two men standing outside. One of them spoke. "Mom, it's me. Johnny, can I come in?" Noreen opened the door, and there stood a man she instantly recognized as her son, now 27 years old. He had long, straight, black-dyed hair reaching his shoulders, wore jeans, a shirt, and a coat against the early spring chill. With him was another man, taller, unidentified, who stayed close the entire time. They talked for more than an hour, maybe an hour and a half. Johnny opened his shirt to show the familiar birthmark on his chest, the one from all the posters. He looked to his companion often, as if seeking permission to speak certain details. He was nervous, glancing around, clearly afraid. What he told her shattered and uplifted her at the same time. He confirmed everything she had come to believe. He had been taken by a large pedophile organization, forced into prostitution, and worse for years. But he had escaped some time earlier. He was living under the radar, changing his appearance, moving frequently to stay hidden. He feared his former captors would silence him if he ever came forward fully. Johnny asked for his mother's help, not to come home, but to expose the people responsible so he could one day live without constant danger. He said he still loved her, missed the family, but returning openly would put everyone at risk. Before dawn broke, he hugged her, laughed once or twice like the boy she remembered, and left with the other man. He promised nothing about coming back, and Noreen never heard from him again. She sat in stunned silence afterward, processing what had just happened. Her son was alive. He had grown into a man right under the world's nose, surviving horrors she could barely imagine, but he was too afraid to reclaim his life. Noreen contacted authorities immediately. She worked with the FBI to create a composite sketch of Johnny as he appeared that night. Long dark hair, older features, but still her boy. She shared the story privately at first, gauging reactions. Her ex-husband, John, and some investigators expressed doubt, pointing out the lack of physical evidence, no fingerprints, no recordings, nothing tangible. How could a missing child, presumed dead by many, simply walk up 15 years later and vanish again? When Noreen finally went public in 1999, the reaction was explosive. Media outlets swarmed. Some hailed it as proof Johnny was out there, victim of the very ring she had described. Others saw it as the desperate fantasy of a mother broken by decades of loss. Skeptics noted that no independent witness saw the visit, that the unidentified man was never found, that Johnny himself left no message or proof. Law enforcement remained unmoved. Without corroboration, they couldn't treat the visit as confirmed. The case file stayed open, but the focus remained on the original abduction. No new charges, no revived suspects from the old allegations. Noreen stood by every word. To her, that night was sacred, undeniable. It reaffirmed her belief that powerful forces had silenced the investigation from the start. Johnny's fear, his need for approval from the stranger, his knowledge of family details, all of it fit the nightmare she had pieced together over the years. The story spread far beyond Iowa. Books were written, documentaries produced, online forums dissected every angle. For some, the Gosch case became emblematic of hidden evils in plain sight. For others, it illustrated how grief can twist perception, how false hope can prolong agony. Yet through it all, Noreen never wavered. She continued speaking, writing personal notes on the Foundation website, hoping Johnny would see them. Messages of love, promises she would never stop fighting. She turned down no interview, no event, no chance to remind the world that her son was still missing. By the early 2000s, the case had become legend in true crime circles. One of the first major child disappearances to grip the nation, one of the most debated for its shadowy claims. Age-progressed images now showed Johnny in his 30s, then 40s. The little boy with the gap-toothed smile was replaced by renderings of a middle-aged man with freckles, blue eyes, perhaps a touch of gray. But no confirmed sighting ever materialized after that claimed visit. No DNA match, no arrest, no body. The questions multiplied while answers stayed frustratingly out of reach. 9 years after that midnight knock, Another strange development would land on Noreen's doorstep, literally, and reignite the entire mystery in ways no one could have predicted. September 1st, 2006. Nearly 24 years had passed since that quiet Sunday morning in West Des Moines, and Johnny Gosch was still living in the shadow of her son's disappearance. She had moved several times, rebuilt her life around the foundation and the endless search, but the pain never dulled. That afternoon, she noticed something unusual on her doorstep, an unmarked envelope, no postage, no return address, just sitting there as if someone had placed it carefully and walked away. Inside were 3 photographs, Polaroids, old and faded, showing 3 young boys bound with rope, gags in their mouths, expressions of fear frozen in time. One boy in particular caught Noreen's eye immediately. He wore sweatpants like the ones popular in the early 1980s. His hair matched the color and style she remembered, and something in the eyes, the shape of the face, convinced her in an instant. This was Johnny. She later described the moment in interviews, how she literally couldn't breathe, how the room seemed to spin as she stared at the image. The boy appeared to be around 12 or 13, the same age Johnny had been when he vanished. The bindings looked real, the distress unmistakable. To Noreen, these weren't random photos. They were proof that her son had been held against his will, abused, photographed as a trophy by his captors. And now, after all these years, someone was sending them to her. She took the envelope straight to the West Des Moines Police Department. Officers spread the photos on a table, studied them closely. According to Noreen, their initial reaction was shock. One detective reportedly said outright, "That's Johnny." Word spread quickly through the department. Reporters caught wind within hours, and the story exploded across local and national news. Headlines screamed about a possible break in one of America's longest-running missing child cases. Could these disturbing images finally unlock what happened on September 5th, 1982? For a brief moment, it felt like momentum was building again. Investigators dusted the envelope for fingerprints, analyzed the photos for any clues, watermarks, timestamps, anything that might point to origin. Noreen went public immediately, granting interviews where she held nothing back. She insisted the photos were authentic, that the boy in the sweatpants was undeniably her son. She believed the anonymous delivery was a message, perhaps from someone inside the network who wanted the truth exposed, or from Johnny himself, trying to reach her indirectly. But the excitement didn't last. Within days, the police department scheduled a press conference. A detective from Florida contacted West Des Moines authorities with startling information. Those exact same photographs had been investigated decades earlier, back in the 1970s, long before Johnny was even born. The Florida case involved 3 boys who had reportedly posed for the pictures willingly as part of a prank or hoax, nothing connected to abduction or abuse. The images had circulated in law enforcement circles for years as an example of misleading evidence. West Des Moines police announced that conclusion publicly. They suggested the envelope might have been the work of a cruel prankster, someone who found the old photos online or through true crime forums and decided to torment a grieving mother. No fingerprints were recovered, no DNA, no leads on who left it. The department closed that particular avenue quickly, stating the pictures had no bearing on Johnny's case. Noreen was devastated and furious. She rejected the police findings outright. To her, the sweatpants alone dated the photos to the 1980s, not the 70s. The boy's features matched Johnny too closely to be coincidence. She pointed out that authorities had rushed to dismiss the evidence, just as they had dismissed Paul Bonacci years earlier. In her view, this was another example of the same pattern. Anything that threatened to expose a larger network was quickly shut down. The media frenzy that followed only deepened the divide. Some outlets ran with Noreen's version, interviewing her at length, showing blurred versions of the photos to protect privacy while describing the bindings in detail. Others sided with law enforcement, labeling the incident a hoax that reopened old wounds unnecessarily. Online forums lit up with debates. Enhanced versions of the photos circulated. Armchair detectives zoomed in on every pixel, some claiming to see Johnny's distinctive marks, others seeing nothing but wishful thinking. Noreen stood firm. She kept copies of the photos, showed them in private settings, and incorporated them into her ongoing narrative. To her, they were the closest thing to visual evidence she had ever received that Johnny had suffered exactly as Bonacci and others described. The rejection by authorities only reinforced her long-held belief that powerful interests were still working to keep the full story buried. The 2006 incident marked a turning point in how the public viewed the case. What had once been a straightforward missing child story, tragic but relatable, now carried so many layers of controversy that it became polarizing. Documentaries and books began exploring not just the disappearance but the allegations, the claimed visit, the photos. One notable film, released in 2014 titled Who Took Johnny, delved deep into Noreen's perspective, interviewing her extensively, recreating the morning of the abduction, and presenting the various theories side by side. It reached a new generation, streaming on platforms where viewers binged true crime content late into the night. The documentary didn't solve anything, but it kept the conversation alive. Viewers emerged divided, some convinced Noreen was onto something monumental, others sympathetic but skeptical of the more extraordinary claims. Johnny's father, John Sr., appeared occasionally in media over the years, expressing quieter doubt about the organized ring theory while still hoping for answers. The divorce had been difficult, but both parents shared the same core ache, not knowing. As the 2010s progressed, technology offered new tools that hadn't existed in 1982. Age progression experts refined their images repeatedly, using advanced software to show what Johnny might look like in his 40s, then 50s. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children featured him prominently on their website, alongside thousands of others whose stories had faded from headlines. Genetic databases grew, allowing families to submit DNA in hopes of matches, but nothing linked back to the Gosch case. Tips continued to arrive, though far fewer than in the early years. Every so often a sighting would surface, someone claiming to have seen a man resembling the latest age-progressed sketch in Colorado, or Texas, or even overseas. Investigators followed up when credible, but none panned out. Noreen maintained a website for the foundation, posting updates, personal messages addressed directly to Johnny in case he was reading. "My hope is that you are still alive and that one day we will see each other again." She wrote about her unwavering love, her belief that he was out there living under a new identity, waiting for the danger to pass. By 2019, official statements from West Des Moines police described the case as functionally cold. There were no active leads, no persons of interest under surveillance. Detectives acknowledged the file remained open. Technically, it always would until resolved, but resources had long since shifted to newer disappearances. They expressed the belief that the only real breakthrough would come if remains were discovered and identified through modern forensics. Noreen rejected that outlook entirely. She continued speaking at events, smaller now, but still passionate. Her health became a concern as the years advanced. She was in her 70s by then. But the fire never dimmed. She authored books detailing her journey, laying out the timeline, the witness statements, the private investigator findings, the Bonacci interviews, the night visit, the photographs. Each retelling added new reflections, new pleas for anyone with knowledge to come forward anonymously if necessary. The broader cultural impact lingered too. Johnny's case had helped spark the milk carton campaign, the immediate response laws, the National Center itself. It influenced how America talked about child abductions, making strangers in vans and suspicious cars part of the collective cautionary vocabulary. Yet ironically, the very awareness Noreen fought for also made her son's story a cautionary tale in another way, a reminder that some mysteries endure no matter how loudly they're shouted. As 2020 arrived, the world changed dramatically with global events dominating attention. True crime interests surged during lockdowns, podcasts, and series revisiting old cases, but Johnny Gosch remained on the periphery, too unresolved, too contentious for easy consumption. A few new online investigations popped up, citizen sleuths combing old newspaper archives, re-interviewing retired officers, but nothing substantive emerged. Noreen marked anniversaries quietly. September 5th became an annual ritual, posting memories, photos from happier times, reminders of what Johnny looked like at 12. She described his freckles, the gap between his front teeth, the birthmark on his cheek, the horseshoe scar on his tongue. Details meant to jog someone's memory, somewhere. By the mid-2020s, Johnny would have been in his mid-50s. The latest age progressions showed a man with graying hair, perhaps a beard, lines etched from decades of whatever life he had led. Noreen studied those images the way other mothers studied baby photos, searching for traces of the boy she lost. The questions that started on that suburban street never stopped echoing. Who were the men in the cars? Why did the dome light flash 3 times? What did the tall figure say to the boy walking with his red wagon? And the biggest one of all, after more than 4 decades, where was Johnny Gosch? As January 2026 begins, more than 43 years have passed since Johnny Gosch stepped out into that pre-dawn chill, with his red wagon and little Gretchen trotting beside him. The world has changed in countless ways. Technology that once seemed futuristic now fits in pockets. Missing persons alerts flash instantly on phones. Databases connect law enforcement across continents. Yet one thing remains frozen in time. Johnny is still listed as missing. The West Des Moines Police Department keeps the file open. A reward still stands for information leading to resolution. But the leads that once flooded in have dwindled to almost nothing. Detectives who inherited the case speak of it with the quiet resignation reserved for the oldest mysteries. No persons of interest in active pursuit. No fresh evidence waiting to be tested. Just the weight of decades without answers. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children continues to feature Johnny prominently. His poster shows the familiar childhood photo alongside the latest age progression, depicting a man now in his mid-50s, gray threading through the light brown hair, lines around the blue eyes, the freckles perhaps faded but still there. The distinctive marks remain listed: the gap between front teeth, the birthmark on the left cheek, the horseshoe scar on the tongue. Anyone encountering an older man with those traits is urged to call the tip line, but year after year, the calls that matter never come. Noreen Gosch, now in her mid-80s, has never stopped. Even as time has slowed her travel, she continues sharing the story whenever invited. In the summer of 2025, she spoke at events in Iowa and beyond, recounting the morning her son vanished, the fight for better laws, the details only a mother would carry. Her voice, though softer with age, still carries the same urgency. She maintains contact with other families walking the same unbearable path, offering the hard-earned wisdom of someone who has turned personal devastation into nationwide change. The Johnny Gosch Foundation, though quieter now, remains a touchstone for those who believe larger forces silence certain truths. Online, the case lives on in a way it never could have in 1982. Forums, podcasts, and video channels revisit every detail: the witness statements, the cars, the signals, the later claims that divided so many. New audiences discover the story and dive in, analyzing old interviews, enhancing photographs, debating timelines late into the night. Some focus purely on the abduction morning, convinced a local predator or opportunistic stranger seized the moment. Others linger on the organized allegations, drawing lines to scandals long dismissed by official investigations. The 2014 documentary, Who Took Johnny, still streams widely, introducing fresh eyes to Noreen's unyielding perspective. Viewer comments pour in, some offering sympathy, others theories, a few claiming personal connections that rarely hold up under scrutiny. Yet no theory has ever delivered closure. No deathbed confession, no buried evidence unearthed by construction crews, no random DNA hit in a modern database. The dollar bill with possible handwriting, the Oklahoma sighting, the bathroom wall message all remain tantalizing but unprovable fragments. Paul Bonacci's accounts, once explosive, faded from active discussion after courts and investigators found them lacking. The 1997 visit Noreen described with such conviction stays in the realm of her personal truth, believed fiercely by some, met with gentle skepticism by others. And those 2006 photographs, officially debunked, privately cherished, continue to spark arguments whenever they surface. Johnny's father, John Sr., has lived a quieter life in the years since the divorce. He rarely speaks publicly now, but those who knew him say the loss never left him. The family that once gathered around a 12-year-old boy with a bright future splintered under the strain. Yet the shared hope, or at least the shared not knowing, lingers between them. The broader legacy is undeniable. The laws Noreen pushed through in the 1980s became templates for faster response nationwide. The milk carton campaign, born partly from Johnny's and Eugene Martin's disappearances, evolved into Amber Alerts and digital notifications that have brought thousands of children home safely. The National Center she helped inspire processes millions of reports every year, recovering kids who might otherwise have vanished into the same silence. In that sense, Johnny's story saved lives even as his own remains unresolved. Awareness of child exploitation, trafficking networks, the vulnerabilities of everyday routines, all of it sharpened because one mother refused to let the world forget. But awareness doesn't equal answers. Eugene Martin, the second Paperboy taken 2 years later, remains missing too. Mark Allen's case from 1986 sits in the same cold limbo. The parallels that haunted Noreen still echo for investigators who occasionally review the files side by side, searching for connections technology might finally reveal. Advances in genetic genealogy have cracked decades-old crimes in recent years, giving distant hope that one day a match could surface. Until then, the neighborhoods of Des Moines move forward. New families, new children riding bikes, new paper routes replaced by digital deliveries, while the ghost of that September morning lingers in local memory. Every September 5th, small remembrances appear. A social media post from the police department, a news recap marking another anniversary, a candlelight gathering organized by those who followed the case closely. Noreen often shares a new message, words of enduring love addressed to wherever Johnny might be. She speaks of forgiveness for whatever choices he may have made to stay hidden, of pride in the man he surely became, of the day she believes will come when the full story can finally be told without fear. And so the mystery endures. One of the longest-running missing child cases in American history. A boy left home on an ordinary morning for an ordinary job, and the ordinary shattered into the extraordinary. Witnesses saw pieces of the puzzle but never the whole picture. A mother turned grief into a movement that reshaped how the nation protects its children. Allegations surfaced that reached into shadows most prefer not to acknowledge. Strange evidence arrived and vanished just as quickly. A claimed reunion offered hope too fragile to hold. In the end, the questions circle back to that quiet intersection where papers were picked up and lives diverged forever. Who was in the blue Ford Fairmont? What did the tall man say as he followed the boy with the wagon? Where did the silver car speed off to after the slammed door? And most haunting of all, after everything that has been said, investigated, debated, and mourned, is Johnny Gosch still out there somewhere? 56 years old now, carrying the weight of a childhood stolen on a suburban street? The dachshund Gretchen lived out her years with the family, long gone now. The red wagon was returned, stored away as evidence that never spoke. The newspapers from that Sunday eventually yellowed and crumbled. But the search, the real search, goes on in the hearts of those who refuse to close the book on Johnny Gosch. Perhaps one day a tip will come that changes everything. Perhaps a secret kept too long will finally surface. Or perhaps the truth will stay buried with whatever happened in the darkness before dawn on September 5th, 1982. Until then, Johnny remains one of the faces that launched 1,000 safeguards, one of the names that taught a country how fragile safety can be. His story is a reminder that some doors, once closed, stay locked no matter how desperately we knock. Thank you for joining us through this journey into one of the most enduring mysteries in true crime history. The disappearance of Johnny Gosch changed laws, sparked movements, and left questions we may never answer. Like this video if the story stayed with you, comment your final thoughts on what you believe happened, and hit that subscribe button with notifications on. There are more unresolved cases waiting on Dark Case Desk.